officially started recording, I thought I should announce to you all that we are now over half funded. We are at $4,410.
Congrats.
It was your mom who kicked us over, Kyle.
Was it? Oh, that's
It
so
was, yeah.
That's fantastic. I
Love
will
that.
have to give them a call after. That's all right. This is a great way to start. All right. Well, hello everyone. This is our remote studio visit. I wanted to bring in some of the engagement that I was hoping to get through my residency at Arts Commons, which has been difficult without access to the building. Ideally, I would have been there to be able to showcase the space that I arranged and the way that I've put up work around, but we're going to make do anyway. I am here with my co-author and co-creator of Pass Me By, Ryan Danny Owen.
Hey there, I'm Ryan Danny Owen.
So we are here with another member of the RBC Emerging Artists Program, which is hosted through Arts Commons and RBC. Darryl Sinclair.
Hello, I'm Darryl. I am a multidisciplinary artist. I work a lot with like pen and pencil and ink, as well as I like to do a lot of like sewing and fiber art. Yeah, and my project through the RBC Emerging Artists Program at Arts Commons is going to be making a 7-foot tall stuffed animal of the sky.
Yeah. I am stoked to see what you do with that project. It's called Stress Eaters, right?
Yeah, these guys themselves, they're called stress eaters. Yeah, the concept is you write notes about what you're feeling stressed out about, and then you can put it in his mouth and he eats it for you, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Have you, I think I remember you reading that you were adapting it for the COVID restrictions. How have you changed that now?
Yeah, I'm going to be inviting people to fill out an online anonymous survey, and then I'm going to be writing out all of the notes personally and displaying them around the space. I'm going to be in the Lightbox studio. Yeah, and through the residency there, I'm going to be just displaying all of these notes around of what people are stressed out about. And then once my giant guy is finished, I'm going to crawl inside its mouth, and then also take all the notes and shove them in the mouth at the same time that I'm inside it.
I love that. I think I remember you doing like a version of this project with the Herd residency like a few years ago, right?
Yeah, that's actually this guy right here.
That's that one, right? I
Yeah.
remember you. Hello there.
Yes, his name is Edgar.
Hello, Edgar. How nice to see you. You're clearly eating well.
Well fed.
But I thought it was so interesting when you presented this project originally and now too, because I think it's kind of a really beautiful conduit of like having a friend to actually tell like secrets and personal things to, and like a confidant. And I think it's telling because you make these wonderful, familiar, very comforting creatures, but you yourself are also just so lovely and comforting and kind to speak to. So I commend you on making something that's so personal and so open to conversation.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I have a lot of fun making them. I just like making weird little things.
Of course. I mean, that's all what we're really doing, right?
Exactly.
I love the idea of like the stress eater, like particularly during a pandemic. I feel like that character is going to have no shortage of things to eat in terms of anxious notes. Is it actually going to be like a full like wearable suit? Like, will you be able to like put your arms in its arms?
I don't know about that. I should try to like see if I can do that. Right now it's just gonna be like just a pocket. I've done the measurements to make sure that I can fit inside of it. Like I'll probably just be like crunched up. Like I'm not gonna be able to like sprawl or anything. But I'm just gonna be like a hunched little nugget gremlin inside its mouth.
And what's the process of making them? What are they made out of?
I've been making them out of fleece because it's really soft and very forgiving to work with. This one I accidentally did inside out. He would have been a lot like differently fuzzy, but I used the wrong side, so he got it really pilly. But he
It
was my
gives them kind
first
of an
one.
interesting, like, scaly texture.
Yeah, he is very interesting texture. But yeah, I use fleece, and then for like the nose and for the teeth and for his butt, I use felt. They're all very like friendly fabrics to work with, and that like they don't fray very easily, which is nice. The only problem with them is because they get pilly and there's a lot of like stuff that comes off, they can clog your machine a bit.
Mhm.
But my process will be like I'm just gonna draft out all of my pieces. I have all the math done, so all my measurements are done. I just have to draw them out. I usually do tracing paper, so that way I can wreck it and I don't feel bad about it. And then I just trace that out on my fabric and cut it out and just start sewing.
I love that. Yeah. What's the scale that you're doing? Is it going to be like person sized?
Yeah, so his body itself, so like this part is
Mm.
gonna be 7 feet about.
Oh wow, that's going
So
to be
that's not
sweet.
including the legs or arms or anything. So he'll probably be very monstrously tall.
I love that. I love the lightbox space too because it kind of has that front like almost like showroom window space that I
Hmm.
can just see him sitting in.
Yeah,
That's gonna be so exciting and so interesting to see. Are you making him in the space?
I wanted to. With the recent rollback to phase one, I'm not sure what accessibility looks like in that space right now. I don't know if I'll be allowed in that space at all.
Um,
Originally, my thought was to use that space to create him so that it can be almost like a documentation of the process of making him as people walk by or even do like the virtual tours. But I don't know what that's going to look like right now. I'm going to be hiring my partner, who's a photographer, to hopefully
okay.
photograph my process as much as I can. Um, Obviously, paying him because I don't want to steal his work for free. Um,
So kind
and
of you.
then, thanks. I know, valuing other artists' work. How kind of me. Um, yeah. But yeah, I'm excited. Oh, it's gonna be fun. Oh yeah, I also have to get him to make me giant wooden buttons for the eyes because.
Oh, I didn't even think about like those little things that you just
Hmm.
definitely need to have. Yeah,
Yep.
that's gonna be a whole processing time. Are you
Yeah.
3D printing them? Are you making them out of wood?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask my partner to make them out of wood because he does some woodworking.
That's so lovely.
Yeah, and then even with like these kind of details, like the thread inside the eyes, or even where you can see the visible thread here, you can't really scale embroidery floss to be 10 times bigger. So I'm gonna use yarn instead. There's a lot of like little nuances that like, hold on, my camera's not focusing. There's a lot of little nuances that are weird to think about and kind of yeah, you don't think about until you're like, hey, wait a minute. If this thing is 10 times bigger than normal, what else needs to scale?
Yeah, and it's kind of those crucial details that almost make it more comforting to approach and things like that. So they're
Mm-hmm.
they're kind of crucial to the act of creation. And I think also like the patchwork is such a relevant conversation when you talk about mental health and that idea of like
Mm-hmm.
living with it kind of for, I think about it a lot for myself with mental health as it's something I'm still actually coming to terms with, despite the hard residency, despite it all.
Fair
I
enough.
am very uncomfortable with the fact that like I am going to be living with mental illness for the rest of my life, and it's kind of just part of who I am. And the push forward is a lot harder than it is for a lot of other people.
I think that's especially relevant given your guys' graphic novel and the themes that you guys touch on with that too, with dementia and all that, and all of the things that come along with that.
Yeah, I was going to ask about like the kind of relationship that you have between mental health and this project, the way that like this project is inspired by conversations about mental health, but also in the way that mental health like impacts the actual creation of the work and of the art. I know for myself that it can be the funny thing about art is that I feel like producing art takes having really solid mental health and having like a great environment. But artists are also sometimes the least likely to be in that space and are sometimes the ones dealing with the most challenge to actually get into this healthy spot where they can create.
Definitely. I have generalizing anxiety disorder, so for me, like mental health is a really personal thing, and like Ryan, it's something that I have to learn to accept and as a part of my life and always will be. Yeah, and like for me, sewing is especially like therapeutic because a lot of it's just very monotonous, a lot of it's very repetitive, a lot of it's very there's tedium and there's a certain comfort in that as well as far as, distracting myself from anxiety or, the verge of a panic attack. You just do something monotonous and distracting. And it also brings me a lot back to my childhood where I would sew with my mom a lot growing up. We weren't very well off or anything. So we would sew a lot of our toys. My mom used to make like yarn dolls. I don't know if your parents ever did that. She would just take yarn and she would put like a wad of yarn as like the head and then just like tie knots along it to make the arms and the legs and the body of like a doll. So physical, I guess, things and these kinds of objects have always just been such a part of me and growing up and my childhood that it's just like there's a definitely a comfort there too.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. And in terms of the sewing part of it, because I also sew a lot myself, and there's kind of this. It's a non-cognitive thing. It's just like an automatic reaction almost. I feel like it's almost, I can just kind of let my mind wander and explore my thoughts and just sew and think about things that I'm feeling, and especially as times are changing and I'm kind of exploring my feelings around gender and I'm exploring my feelings around mental health. Like sewing has helped me so much in processing those kinds of feelings. So I completely understand how you would feel in processing trauma and like anxiety through this kind of monotonous process, right?
Hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, that's a thing that I used to tap into a lot with painting in particular. Like when I was doing oil paintings that would take me like 50 hours or something, those could be a really great place to step into when I wasn't feeling great. To just kind of like get lost in like color and texture and an audiobook that I might be listening to or something. It was a really good like kind of portal through to escape whatever was ailing me at the time. Um, Passing By is an interesting project because it's very much like taking on a lot of those feelings head on in some ways. At parts of the process where I'm like inking or maybe like doing colors that's really in a smooth way, it can kind of have that sort of same sort of effect. So other times it can be like really bringing things into the front and sort of like forcing me to deal with things that I otherwise would like to ignore.
In thesis, art is a great escape, but it's definitely not helping.
Yeah, sometimes it brings out those things that we want to not think about.
And then you're like, oh, I have to deal with this now. Okay. And
Yeah.
you just have to put it somewhere for a while and just let it prosper and become. And I think that's kind of why I love the stress eaters so much, is they kind of sit there and they almost act like, again, that totem for anxieties, and especially the process being anonymous now. I think there's like again that familiarity and that kind of layer of trust, but there's also just that kind of like that comfort in knowing that you like can let something go, or like at least not hold it in as much anymore. How do you this is kind of a weird question. How do you feel the conversation around mental health has changed in the last few years?
I don't know. I feel like it's hard because part of me feels like I'm in a bubble about it. I feel like, the conversation, at least in my close circles, have been very like positive. They mostly have been from the beginning, but I feel like people are a lot more open to talk about it. Um, I think in general things are changing a bit. I'm less afraid of admitting that I need a mental health day at work than I used to be. I used to say I was, sick or had a migraine, which I do get migraines, so it's not an outright lie. Um, but I used to make up other excuses for things, whereas now with my job, I can say like, "Hey, I had a panic attack all night. I need a day off," and it's a lot more forgiving, at least with the people that I work with, and I think that's a bit of a sign of just the overall a little bit. Um, I think there's still work to be done. I think there's still a lot of misinformation and stigma when it comes to anxiety and stuff. I know that at my office, some of my colleagues have said, "Oh, you don't look like someone who has anxiety," and I'm like, "Yeah, because anxiety doesn't look like me in a sweaty ball in the corner all the time. Sometimes it does, but not all the time." So I think there is still work to be done as far as like what that looks like. Because again, like I can have a normal functioning life and still have anxiety. It doesn't preclude me from participating, and it doesn't have to look like anything. It's just a thing that I have to live with.
I think like changing what people think something looks like has been such like an interesting conversation. Like I think a lot about, depression, and I think a lot about generalized anxiety, and I also have ADHD, and like kind of that layer makes it for me to enter into things and kind of process conversations very easily, and it usually takes me a while. And there's that fear that I've had for many many years, where I have this huge fear of being perceived as like stupid or weak or like you know, it's just kind of the way that it goes. And I feel like I can feel the weight of that conversation changing, where it's more this willingness for like us as people who deal with those things to kind of have a moment to speak out and be like, hey, I'm actually experiencing something kind of hard to explain, but it's important and I need you to understand it. And it's a good thing, but it's also kind of scary because there's so many ways that people can interpret it and people can kind of approach talking to you about it. I'm so thankful that you're feeling more open and I'm feeling more open too to kind of having that conversation. How are you feeling, Kyle?
Yeah, I'm thinking a little bit about like getting to know my own mental health more. And shortly after this book was released, I was diagnosed as bipolar type 1. And that was a thing that was like really difficult to come to terms with for a little while. Just the ride of that condition was that I had this extreme manic swing and then a really cataclysmic drop afterwards. And that actually went a few times. And I fell into a really big pit, and like it was even just hard on like myself because I had such a like base understanding of what this disorder was. I think that a lot of times the closest thing that I had was like bad TV representations of a person's mood switching from this to that really quickly, which is not at all what bipolar disorder is. I don't know where that like pseudo version came from. Um, but I think it's been useful as like a guide for myself to like sort of set boundaries for myself and to be a bit more understanding when it takes a lot of spoons just to get through the day and I might not be as productive as I wanted to be. I don't have an employer right now that I'm like answering to, but I answer to myself, and so that's like been really important for me just to like recognize that sometimes it's okay to just like take a day and go for a walk and like focus on like cleaning my house and making food and like getting my like head into a right space before I jump back into the work that I'm doing. That's kind of where I mentioned before about like this art making process like requires you to be in a good space, and that can be hard to get to. So, you know, building techniques that can kind of maintain that for you is really important. I I don't, it doesn't come up that often in conversation about bipolar specifically, but I definitely talk a lot about depression. I've been really open with my experience with regards to that for years. And I know that I'm definitely not alone in that experience. I connected with a lot of folks from Calgary and art school, and back home, people working in labor industries. You know, depression's a pretty endemic sort of situation that a lot of people I think deal through at different points in their life.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was thinking about when we were talking about sewing actually was your concrete background, Kyle, and how that kind of has a similar thing where it's based in technical and you can kind of let your mind disappear almost and not think about those things. And in a lot of ways, it's like with your first book, we're so much talking about like a small town depression and a small town kind of angst and this kind of the old man struggling with his identity and you know where experiences change and memories start to fade away and you know it's interesting to think about it in context of where you have also come from, Kyle, and where the book comes from.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you brought up concrete, because that used to be that was like some of the periods where I was the most miserable. The relief that I got in a day was going to work and swinging a sledgehammer and raking around gravel and shoveling and just like having a task in front of me that I just like needed to do. And yeah, that can be really helpful for like just giving yourself something to accomplish and doing so, and like just building yourself up back, even if it's just throughout the day and you have to redo it all again the next day. I used to find like this particularly physical labor so therapeutic.
How much do you think like that sort of feeling about mental health and like, you know, needing those tasks to feel productive and feel fulfilled are like, I don't know, I guess just problems with how people talk about value as human beings. Like I know like myself, like I also feel like I need to be busy all the time. And I know that some of my highest points of trauma and my highest points of feeling anxious and just, you know, on the verge of panic attacks all the time, a lot of it was, you know, I would overwhelm myself with things to do so that I would feel productive, and then I wouldn't have to like feel bad about taking time for myself.
Yeah, I think Kyle's also kind of notorious for that, where it's just constant nonstop working. Because, I think schedule and like things that repeating and being part of like a daily ritual and almost like a process are extremely important in the process of mental health and like kind of finding a grounded surface to stand on. But there is a limit where if suddenly it's like 14 buildings on top of this ground, like it's gonna fall apart because you have to remember that you are a person and the creative part of you is something that like it grows and it manifests and it changes with you, so it kind of needs that time to also like do nothing so that you can process and make better things. It's the the snake eats its own head mentality, where it's just constantly going in that circle motion of like, oh, I have to be making now or else I'm going to miss out on the opportunity to make more. But you're not realizing that like in the between parts of that you're just kind of stressing yourself out and losing yourself.
Yeah, one of the best things that I ever did, I have like this time tracker that I'm obsessed with because I am that person who's like, I need to be productive and I need to know how productive in a week, in a year, etc. One of the best things that I ever did was I started tracking things like going for groceries, cooking food, exercising, taking a walk when I need to. And all of those things I started tracking the same way that I would track my time actually working on a project or sending emails or doing banking, et cetera, et cetera. Because it's a way of tricking myself because I do have that person who's like, you need to work X amount of hours in a day or you're not worth nothing. But if I can make, a good chunk of that, like if my goal is to do the 40-hour work week, but 10 of those hours are like me focusing on taking care of myself, that's stuff like, it's so important. Like when I cook myself a good meal and have gone for a walk in a day, I crush work compared to when I'm just like snacking on an apple and just going the entire day without eating anything other than cigarettes and coffee. I can see the output difference, and despite that, I'll sometimes fall back into those bad techniques.
Things constantly repeat and happen over and over again with mental health, right? Like you're never going to be at the point where like it's confirmed what's going to happen, like the way that your brain's going to react, what your daily ritual is. It's just never going to be that way. So it's good to constantly like it changes, things constantly change. It's just knowing and like trusting yourself that like you can be like, oh no, this isn't good, like I need to take a moment for myself, right?
Yeah. Another thing that I think has been really important for me is like recognizing that my mental health is a lot of times like the weather. And I keep a journal, just a really simple like jot notes of like what I've done in a day and how I felt. And that's been super helpful because when I fall into these sort of like pits of despair or whatever's happening, I can look back at my notes and I can be like, okay, I feel like garbage right now. And when you feel that way, it feels like you feel that way forever and always. And like, that's just all that there is. But I can look back at these notes and I can be like, okay, like I feel crappy today. I had a bad day yesterday, but like the 5 days previous, we were doing really well. Out of the month previous that I had, like there was a handful of bad days, but look at all the good days. And like, it helps to remind me that it's a temporary thing and that it's like something that I kind of have to like get through, but that I will get through it. And that there's going to be sunshine again and that I'm going to feel well again.
Yeah, well, I think to bring it back to Darryl, that's kind of the same point where it's these temporary messages to bring it, to kind of bring awareness and conversation and like letting go of things.
I really love a lot of this conversation happening here. Kyle, I love some of those tips. I'm gonna have to steal them because like writing down things that you're doing during the day that seem like mundane but are still work, like you're still doing work, like cooking yourself dinner, that's still work. I think those are such great tips. And I remember when I went to counseling, like some of the things that stuck with me the most were when my counselor said like, when you take a mental health day and when you're sitting on a couch watching a movie, like you're doing work for yourself. Like that's not you just wasting time. You're not just like being a lump and being useless. Like that's work. You're doing work for yourself. You're doing something. It's productive for yourself. And I think that's such an important thing to remember, and putting it in a physical realm by writing it down, I think is so helpful.
Yeah, I find it super helpful to have like something kind of like concrete that I can look back to.
Mm-hmm.
The time log helps me when I am going through and like filling out like my days. It helps me remember what I've done, and it also helps me to feel like I've accomplished a lot in the week when I can look back on all these things that I've done. Another thing that I'll say is that like the 40-hour work week, the kind of like model, which is like apparently the minimum if you're some freak who wants to do 60 hours. I don't know what they're on. But anyway, even the 40-hour work week was designed with the idea that there was one person out making an income and there was another person home who's like taking care of domestic affairs. Which is a situation that I'm not interested in. But the point is that like, even if you're like putting in 40 hours of work a week, like and then you're taking care of yourself and like you're, keeping track of a house and your bills and your this and your that. That's all work. That's all part of the thing that goes into getting you through life.
Yeah, I've actually, I've never thought of it that way, that like actually kind of doing the act of taking care of yourself and like making sure that you can kind of function and be a person, like that is actually work and that is actually process. And writing them down is also something I've never thought of, in the terms that you can like almost go back and look at the receipts of your life and like process the conversation and kind of the way that things are happening and like what's actually going on. That's a really good tip. I've never actually thought of that.
Yeah, and like to speak from an author who's dealing with a book about memory, it's also really interesting to go back. Like I started doing this in like 2019. So it's really interesting to go back to the first year that I had and like look through and like you forget so much if you don't write it down. And like even when I'm doing these logs and I go 4 or 5 days without having logged it, just thinking back, I'm like, what did I do? Where was I? What happened that day? Like there's it's surprising how much you lose without making some sort of like log to keep track of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very bad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you look
Well-
through my sketchbook, it's like all writing. It's like all of it's just me writing notes to myself. It's just like notes and notes and writing and notes. So like definitely I think writing is such a good process for like everything. Memory, for just like working through stuff, for ideation. I love writing.
I also love writing, funny enough. I actually learned that was, again, it's kind of all the things that you learn in COVID and quarantine is like writing and like texting, kind of processing as you're processing things. And like, as I'm like literally processing like emotions in my brain or processing thoughts, I'm like typing them out or I'm writing them out just as a means to kind of document how quickly I'm going through things and how much I'm like changing the way that I feel about something literally in the moment. I don't know if like anyone else has that experience, but it's definitely one thing that's helped me a lot is actually finding people that I can have a conversation with over text message and kind of help me process emotions because I can't all the time, if that makes any sense.
100%. I have one friend who I know will call me out if I'm being a bitch on something. So like I'll always just like if I'm feeling like really sensitive about something or like not sure where I'm like standing on something and just like having trouble like processing what that is, I'll just message them and be like, "Girl, how am I? Tell me, how am I?"
I think we really like that's the thing that we need so desperately is just people to be like, no.
Yeah. Yeah,
Just
there was
when things are happening because like not a lot of people are comfortable doing those things, but it is just such a like it's a godsend when someone's just like, that's not what's going on. And you're like, oh, okay, moving on.
100%. Yeah, there was one time where I was mad at my partner and I texted them and I was just like, "I'm really mad. This happened and I'm super mad." And she was like, "Maybe don't be. You're kind of being funny about this." And I'm like, "You know what? You're right. I should probably just like go apologize and drop it. Thanks. That's what I needed."
Those are good friends to have. The like ones who were like, especially like I found like growing up, like the best thing were like the friends that were where we were always just like making fun of each other. Because like everyone has like things that they're like kind of on. And like it's so good when like your friend can like rib you and like poke you in like a place where like you're kind of out of line and like do it in a funny way that makes you laugh at like how much of a jerk you are yourself or something like and it helps you grow. It's so much fun. But to take back up on something that Ryan said about like writing as a way of like processing emotions that you're going through. I find, I don't know about you, but that's something that I'll do with the scripts for our books. Plenty of times from like, in particular, I've had like some traumatic experiences or just things that I was dealing with, and like I'll like go for a drive the next day and like pull up my laptop or like start typing away to try and like figure out like, okay, this happened to me. How can I make this happen to another character, and like start making sense of it through this like external world that I get to like control some circumstance of.
I always will know when Kyle's had a day because I'll receive a Google Doc notification for 14 pages.
I love that.
It's
That's
absolutely
awesome.
a thing in the same sense with like the sequel. I'm actually processing a lot of emotions about like you, Kyle. Like a lot of early emotions of like romance and kind of like longing and love. Like God, those are gone now, but I'm just kidding. I do love you, Kyle, but definitely in that same sense of like there was so much that was happening, especially now looking back at it 2 years later, because we did write this script kind of when we wrote the first one, and it's changed a lot since its like its newest version and like the version that's going out to everybody on Kickstarter. But it's just changed so much in the sense that looking back at those things is like funny and memorable and also like wonderful because I could look at them and see that I've done something to them. Does that make sense? Like I've taken memories that made me uncomfortable or I felt sad about, and I reinterpreted them into being something that exists in like an art way and is also very sad but very personal and very like filled with a lot of love.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where like we really get the, you know, like the integrity that our book has, is because so much of it is mined out of personal experience, where like, yeah, things will happen with us, or even with people that I've heard about, and like just like kind of finding that like emotional core that exists in reality and like in our memories, and pulling that into this story, into these other characters. I think that that's like the heart of what we do, and that's really the like the focus that everything else is built around.
I think it's the kind of almost the heart of like all of us in the sense of like exploring and expressing ourselves in ways and expressing other people's experiences and traumas and things in ways that are changing the conversation around them. Do you know what I mean?
No, I think that's such a like a good point in just terms of like thinking about those moments and how we process them and how that like those experiences come out in our artwork and our expression, and I think it's just so wonderful because it's also what makes us all so different too, and but it's also the thread that binds a lot of us as well. Like we have a lot of shared experiences, and how we handle those things makes us different but also makes us all the same. And it's just like it's such an interesting thing to I don't know, I guess read through this journey of and pass me by and Ed's experiences, and hearing you guys talk about it and your guys' experiences and how personal it is to you guys too. It's so magical.
Well, it's so great to get to you about your project as well. I'm so curious to see kind of how you approach the public aspects of it and the making process. That's what I'm really excited about, is actually the making process, because I think that's a crucial part of who you are and how you approach your work. And I love that kind of thing, and kind of the way of finding the way through the maze, I guess, through art and stuff. I was actually just talking to a friend in terms of personal shared experiences, a friend who recently got diagnosed with ADHD as an adult, which I don't know if I fortunately was diagnosed with ADHD as a child, and that still has led to very weird things for me. But I've been meeting a lot of people who are starting to like actually come to terms and accept that they do have ADHD, and it actually does manifest in many different ways for a lot of people. And the way that I described it was, once you learn that you can like you have this access to a whole different language, and that your pain or your troubles aren't just based on you being like a lazy person, like they're shared mutual experiences for all of us. And it's almost like finding out that you were doing the wrong puzzle. Like you've been doing the puzzle for years, and it turns out that the picture is completely different, and you can interpret it in so many different ways, and you can kind of transform it to be what you need it to be. And that's kind of the power that I'm realizing that we all have as artists.
An interesting thing about ADHD is that I was listening to someone talk about it as a like a condition that arises through like our social circumstances and kind of like the very unnatural lives that human beings live today. Where like in like a hunter-gatherer society where you're like really apt to like notice any little signal that comes from around you, be that auditory or visual, and you're like prone to just like picking up on new information all over the place, is actually really helpful. When you're sat in a classroom where you're supposed to sit still for 6 hours and learn from a book and from a teacher, all of a sudden that aptitude that is actually really beneficial becomes a huge problem. And it's not because of the person, it's because of the circumstances, because of like the setting that they're placed within.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's such an interesting thing. It's in the same sense of talking about like any form of disability, any form of mental health. Like,
I had one thing to say about the puzzle pieces thing. I thought was really a nice, I guess, metaphor for things. And I know that like it's something that I've also struggled with my sexuality, as far as like those puzzle pieces, and just realizing that everyone else had a different puzzle than I did. I thought I had that puzzle. I was struggling with that puzzle a little bit, and I'm like, oh shit, no, I have no puzzle. Sorry.
you're like, I don't need the puzzle. The puzzle doesn't exist.
There
And
is no puzzle for me.
that's awesome.
Yeah. See you guys.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, Darryl?
I don't know. I just enjoyed talking with you lovely people.
I just enjoy talking with you too. You're so lovely. It's so lovely to
Aw,
see you and talk to you. It's been so long.
I know, it has been long. You guys are lovely to talk to as well. We should like, once all this is over, we should just like go for beers. I really want to go to more drag shows.
Yeah, I want to be in more drag shows.
Yes, I want to watch them.
But I'm actually getting my house redone and I'm getting a lot of work done. So we'll have like a little housewarming party, all of us. We can celebrate.
That'd be so
That
fun.
would be lovely. I mean, backyard hang, have a fire around your place. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, well,
Hell yeah.
get nice.
That'd be super nice.
But yeah, yeah.
Comics.
Comics. Should we talk about comics?
You read any?
I've been reading a lot of web comics. I've been really into webtoon lately, just reading like so many web comics. I've been reading this one that's like a historical queer fiction called Nove, and it's about like an astronomer and a necromancer. Anyway, it's really fun and really like beautifully illustrated, and I'm super into it. I've also been reading one called Cursed Princess Club. It's just really fun and cute. I'm really into that one too. So many web comics. Oh, and Patrick the Vampire is pretty fun too.
I
Less
have
cute.
Vampire.
That one's great. I really like that one.
That's awesome. I love that so much. What was the first one called? Nove?
Yeah.
No.
Novae.
Oh, yeah.
They have a website. I'm on their Patreon because I'm like, I want that exclusive, like, queer, fucking romantic, like, sketches and doodles. I want all of it. I just want it. It's so fun. I love it.
I got a text message today that was like, so your book, ... is there sex in it? ... And I was like, no. I doubt.
Back to Kickstarter and find out.
Anyways, thank you so much, Darryl.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It was so much fun to talk to you guys and just like talk about your guys' project and to talk a little bit about my project. And I think just having these discussions about mental health is so important, and I really enjoyed that we got to talk about it so much. You guys are both just so lovely, and it was so nice to participate, and thank you for inviting me here today.
Thank you so much for coming. It was such a wonderful privilege to get to talk to you. What dates are you in the Lightbox?
May, oh, here, hold on. It's like May to the beginning of July. So May to June. May and June, I'm in there.
Well, hopefully restrictions get it so you can at least work in there a little bit. It is such a fun.
Yeah.
But I'm so excited to see what your project turns out into. I think it's amazing, and I can't wait to see what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
I'm really excited to also see the response, like the content that you gather from the public through the little stress notes that you're going to get. I'd be really curious to see what kind of response that gets. Thank you so much for joining us for this remote studio visit. Darryl, do you have handles and a website? Where can people find you if they want to see more of your work?
I'm mostly on Instagram. I'm Darmeg on Instagram, Darmeg. Yeah, that's where I mostly post like a lot of my like doodles and stuff. I sometimes post like my sewing stuff. I'll probably post more of that while I'm in the studio. But yeah, just Darmeg on Instagram.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much.